The leadership structures within a business, it is a fascinating area, at least from my perspective. Leadership structures determine how workflow, accountability, and authority, how they work together. So, how do we create the leadership structures within a business to ensure that we have high performance of that overall business? And that's the key question. And ultimately, it depends, of course. It depends on the context of the business, depends on the maturity of the business, depends on the individual leaders within the business and the number of them and the maturity of those individuals. What I can't do is necessarily talk or to say exactly how the best leadership structure should be set up, but there are certain ways that we can approach it. There's two key elements that I'd like to talk about. One is whether it's quite a hierarchical structure where really you have your CEO and then your leadership team and then your management team and then the staff, which is much more of a pyramid style approach. So that's one structure, and it's probably the most common structure. It's probably more traditional, and it's one that has seemed to have worked well, assuming that the way the structures are implemented and executed respect the whole organisation, which I might touch on a little bit, particularly on leadership teams in another talk. So non-hierarchical, which is where rather than the pyramid style, you have more of your boxed style, if you will, and that's where there's less or flatter structure, flatter organisational structure would be the way to phrase it, and really where we are decentralising the decision making within the organisation. So those structures are more aligned with businesses that are not developing, like, should we say, a manufacturing plant for cans for a single item. We might have people that are more just focusing on manufacturing those cans. They're not necessarily the highly paid white collar workers where you'd be expecting and paying them to make decisions. So that organization might be more likely to have a pyramid style, whereas your creative agencies, they're all going to be paid to necessarily making decisions and to be creating significant value by those decisions. You'd probably expect that a non-hierarchical structure is for the leadership structure would be more effective. So you've got those two elements, and I've talked about centralized and decentralized decision making and deciding, depending on your organization, which one you go to. Now, that said, either way, whether you have a decentralized or a centralized decision making, what I would be recommending is that rather than there being an individual or one individual, or maybe two, that makes most of the decisions, it is trying to ensure that you actually have what I refer to as a leadership team. And if large enough, also a management team that is there to actually create and lead the organization as a team rather than as individuals that work individually. So the key reason for creating leadership teams, whether they're executive leadership teams or whether they're more management teams that are leading within the organization, it's ensuring that we actually have the diversity of views of the organization itself, all from those different individuals, and that we are collaborating and understanding the different parts of the organization and empowering different people to actually contribute to and make decisions at the right level for the right parts of the organization. But it's actually how those all interact, how the information flows, and how let's say the matrix for what decisions at what level are made by whom is also part of a leadership structure. So how that all works together and the dynamics that occur and the communication, which is fundamental, the communication, whether that's upwards or downwards within an organization, how that actually flows through the organization and the clarity that is provided and comes from those decisions. So I've talked a lot about decision making. I've talked about team structure and how they interact with each other, the overarching principle of whether you're using hierarchical or non-hierarchical, decentralized and centralized decision making are all elements to consider when designing a leadership structure that's effective for your organization. But ultimately, a leadership structure needs to enable a business to be high performing and to create clarity within that organization of everything from the mission of the business, the vision of the business, the values of the business, all the way down also to, maybe why some bit of work down on the warehouse floor should be prioritized over another one. So all that needs to be able to be understood, and clarity, as I mentioned, throughout the organization. So the structures should enable that clarity is provided, and is provided through the organization in a cadence that works for the organization. So that is ultimately the leadership structures that we need to be able to create within the business. So the size of the business, and when I talk about size, I usually refer to size as the number of employees. That's usually the indicator that is used, because ultimately the more employees you have, the more complex and intertwined the relationships that exist. So the more complex it becomes. And therefore, the more complex your leadership structures need to be to ensure you get that clarity through all parts of their organization. And remember, an organization is not just its employees, it's all the stakeholders that might be outside, whether it is the suppliers, whether it is the shareholders, and of course the board, if you have a board, the clients. So they need to be communicated in some way, shape, or form. So anyone that is touching an interaction with that business, we need to be thinking about the leadership structures need to provide that leadership, which is ultimately providing clarity on what's expected and what's happening and where it's going. So that's really the leadership structures that I'm referring to, and is fundamental to ensuring that a business can continue to grow, assuming that is a key outcome, which is for almost all businesses is something that they're trying to do. Because if you don't grow, then you're probably going to die. That's probably so. And as in just reduce in size and continue to not develop as a business, and develop as an overarching group of people that are trying to improve.